The gate was barely wide enough for two men to walk through side by side. That was the only way in. And on the afternoon of April 13, 1919, it became the only way out. Except that the way out was about to be sealed. Inside, thousands of people sat on the bare earth of a public garden in Amritsar called Jallianwala Bagh. Families had come for Baisakhi, the spring harvest festival. Pilgrims had come from the nearby Golden Temple. Others had come to protest peacefully against a British law that let the colonial government imprison Indians without trial. Children ran between the legs of the crowd. An elderly man sold treats from a wooden cart. At around 5:15 in the evening, Brigadier General Reginald Dyer arrived at the entrance with 50 riflemen, Gurkha and Baluchi soldiers under his command. He did not send a warning. He did not order the crowd to disperse. He positioned his men at the mouth of the garden, at the only real exit, and gave the command to fire. For approximately 10 minutes, the soldiers fired into the crowd, directing their volleys toward the thickest parts of the gathering and toward the narrow lane that people were desperately trying to escape through. By the time the shooting stopped, the soldiers had fired an estimated 1,650 rounds. They stopped not out of mercy, but because they were running out of ammunition. The exact number of dead has never been agreed upon. Britain's official inquiry counted 379. Indian nationalist organizations investigating separately counted over 1,000 dead. Some victims drowned in a well inside the garden, jumping in to escape the bullets. Others bled to death overnight because Dyer had imposed a curfew and no one was permitted to come to their aid until morning. This is a story about that garden. But it is also a story about the moment an empire's authority, built for over a century on the idea that British rule brought order, justice, and protection, collapsed into something it could never fully explain away. Empires do not usually fall because of a single afternoon. They fall slowly, eroded by decades of resistance, economics, war, and shifting global power. But sometimes there is a moment, a single undeniable moment, after which the old justification simply stops working. A moment that even the empire's own defenders cannot fully defend. Was April 13, 1919, that moment for British India? Did the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh mark the day when Indian independence stopped being a demand and became instead an inevitability? This documentary asks, at what precise point does a colonial power lose its moral right to rule? And did General Dyer, in that walled garden, hand India's independence movement something it had never fully possessed before? Unified national outrage. To understand why thousands of ordinary people gathered in that garden on that particular day, you have to understand what had been building in Punjab and across India in the months before. The First World War had just ended. Over 1 million Indian soldiers had fought for the British Empire, in France, in Mesopotamia, in East Africa. Indian political leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi, had supported the war effort, believing or hoping that loyalty would be rewarded with greater self-governance once peace came. Instead, in March 1919, the British colonial government passed the Rowlatt Act. The law extended emergency wartime powers into peacetime. It allowed authorities to imprison people suspected of sedition without trial, without a jury, and without the right to know the evidence against them. To Indians who had just sent their sons to die for the empire's war, it felt like a betrayal, dressed up as security policy. Gandhi, still a relatively new figure on the national political stage, called for a nationwide hartal, a general strike, as an act of nonviolent protest. The response was extraordinary. Shops closed, streets emptied. In city after city, Indians of different religions and classes stood together in a way that unsettled colonial administrators used to a divided, more manageable population. Punjab became one of the most volatile flashpoints. The province had contributed disproportionately to the war effort in soldiers and revenue, and now felt it had received only more repression in return. In Amritsar, two respected local leaders, Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu, had been organizing protests against the Rowlatt Act. On April 10, 1919, British authorities arrested them and secretly deported them from the city. The arrests triggered violent riots. Crowds attacked banks, set fire to government buildings, and killed several Europeans, including bank employees. A British schoolteacher named Marcella Sherwood was assaulted by a mob on a street in Amritsar and left badly injured. The city was placed under the control of the military. Reginald Dyer, a career British Army officer with a reputation for decisive and often harsh command, was sent to restore order. By April 13th, Dyer had banned public gatherings of more than 4 people in Amritsar. But this notice had been announced in only a few parts of the city, and many people, especially those arriving from outlying villages for Baisakhi, had not heard it. Historical accounts differ on how widely the ban was actually publicized. For thousands of them, Jallianwala Bagh was simply where the festival crowd and the protest happened to be that day. What is certain is that Dyer knew, before he arrived at the garden, that a large crowd had gathered there. And what he chose to do next was not born of panic. It was a decision made deliberately by a man who later explained his own reasoning without apology. The turning point in this story is not a single event. It is a decision made in the mind of one man in the short walk between the gate of Jallianwala Bagh and the moment he gave the order to fire. Dyer had, by his own later testimony before the Hunter Commission, the official British inquiry into the massacre, arrived at the garden with a clear intention. He stated that his goal was not simply to disperse the crowd, but to produce what he called a sufficient moral effect on the population of Punjab. Ver's own testimony to the Hunter Commission. He wanted the punishment to be severe enough to be remembered, not just in Amritsar, but across the province. This is the detail that transforms the massacre from a tragic loss of control into something else entirely, a calculated act. Dyer did not order his troops to fire warning shots. He did not order them to fire into the air. According to his own testimony, he directed the firing toward the densest parts of the crowd, and specifically toward the exits where people were trying to flee. He also testified that had he been able to bring his armored vehicles with mounted machine guns into the garden, he would have used them as well, but the entrance was too narrow for the vehicles to pass through. From Hunter Commission testimony. For Indians watching the aftermath unfold, this was the revelation that reshaped the entire independence movement. The massacre was not a rogue accident by a panicked officer. It was policy, spoken in the language of control, discipline, and moral instruction, applied to men, women, and children who had gathered for a religious festival. In the days after the massacre, the struggle was not only about grief. It became a struggle over the truth itself, over whether the British government would treat what happened in that garden as a tragedy, a necessary evil, or a crime. Martial law remained in effect across Punjab for weeks after the massacre. The most infamous was the crawling order. In response to the assault on Marcella Sherwood, Dyer decreed that any Indian wishing to pass through the specific street where she had been attacked must do so by crawling on their hands and knees. Indians were also subjected to public floggings for minor offenses, and some were forced to salute British officers by touching their foreheads to the ground. In India, the massacre became a unifying wound. Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate poet, wrote to the Viceroy of India, renouncing the knighthood he had been given by the British Crown, stating that he wished to stand, in his words, shorn of all special distinctions by the side of my countrymen. Verified, Tagore's Letter of Renunciation, 1919. Exact original wording preserved in historical record. Mahatma Gandhi, who at the time of the massacre had still expressed some faith in the possibility of reform within the British system, began a visible and significant shift in his political thinking. Historical accounts describe the massacre as a decisive factor that pushed Gandhi toward the non-cooperation movement, launched in 1920, a campaign urging Indians to withdraw entirely from British institutions, schools, courts, and honors. Gandhi's evolving position is documented across his writings and speeches of the period, though scholars debate the precise weighting of causes. In Britain, the response revealed a different and troubling truth. When the Hunter Commission concluded its investigation in 1920, it censured Dyer's actions and led to his removal from active command. But the punishment stopped there. Dyer was never criminally charged. He returned to Britain, and rather than being treated as a disgraced officer, he was welcomed by a significant portion of British public opinion as a man who had, in their view, saved British lives during a moment of imperial crisis. The debate over Dyer's actions reached the highest levels of British government. In the House of Commons, Secretary of State for War Winston Churchill condemned the massacre in stark terms, describing it as an episode without precedent or parallel in the modern history of the British Empire. A monstrous event. Verified. Churchill's speech to the House of Commons, July 1920. The House of Commons ultimately voted to disapprove of Dyer's actions. But in the House of Lords, the vote went the other way. The upper chamber voted to approve of Dyer's conduct. Beyond Parliament, a conservative British newspaper, the Morning Post, launched a public fund to support Dyer, raising a substantial sum of money from British citizens who saw him as a defender of imperial order rather than a perpetrator of a massacre. The fund ultimately collected close to £26,000, an enormous sum at the time, along with a jeweled sword presented to Dyer as a token of gratitude. The massacre did not by itself end the British Empire in India. That would take almost 3 more decades two world wars, and a movement built by millions of people whose names history will never record individually. But on April 13, 1919, in a garden meant for festival and prayer, something the empire could never fully repair was broken. Its claim to be a moral guardian. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more untold history every single day. See you in the next one.